As we approach the 1-week anniversary of Kevin Durant's trade request to the Phoenix Suns, we're watching what happens when the NBA media runs out of updates to give you. But we can read the tea leaves, and on today's episode of Locked On Suns, that's just what we'll do. Plus, I will tell you why not to believe that those reports saying it'll be 2 to 3 months are completely wrong. We'll do it all on today's show.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 5 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen today and every day. Don't go anywhere. I will be there right with you as soon as this news finally breaks or we know any more along the way. So if you're finding us on your favorite podcast platform, go ahead and hit follow or subscribe. Make sure that this show ends up in your feed every single day. And if you're finding us on YouTube, that is the best way to support the show. Go ahead and hit subscribe down below and drop me a comment telling me what you think is going on with all of this radio silence on seemingly every side as it relates to Kevin Durant. I'm going to go through some of the reports that we've heard here in this short 4-day week. I'm not sure if everybody just decided to take the weekend off for vacation because we did not hear much more today either, unfortunately. But that will not slow any of us down. I want to start with Shams Charania on Pat McAfee's show, specifically what Shams said about this whole ordeal potentially lasting 2 to 3 months. We'll get to 2 specific teams, the Raptors and the Pacers, that could be sort of the party poopers in all of this, but the timing is the important part, and that's what Shams spoke to in his appearance on the Pat McAfee show. He said that the Nets are prepared to wait until their demands are met. He made a point of saying that with the James Harden talks, the Ben Simmons talks, even the Rudy Gobert talks, that it tends to take a while. 2 to 3 months was the timeline that he kept giving. The problem is, as he indicated that those demands still contain an all-star and multiple picks and everything else, nobody seems to be able to meet that demand, as evidenced by how long this whole thing is taking. Like, if you just look at the slowness of all of this, it's obvious that the Nets have not gotten a lot of bites on their bait. So let's go through that just as a refresher. That young all-star designation, if we keep in mind again that because the Nets still have Ben Simmons on their team, they cannot take back a player who's on a designated rookie max extension. So that cuts out so many players in the league. Like, if you just go through the 2022 all-stars, the players that are relatively young that are all-stars: Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Luka Doncic, Devin Booker, Karl Anthony Towns, Jason Tatum, John Morant, all of those players, Trae Young now, Andrew Wiggins even, who was a surprise appearance there. All of those players that I just listed off are on that rookie designated max extension contract, which means as long as Ben Simmons is there, they cannot be traded. So if you go through the past 2 years, let's say, of relatively young players who made the all-star team and are not on that type of a contract, I came up with Zach LaVine, Domantas Sabonis, LaMelo Ball, and Jared Allen. Obviously, LaMelo Ball would be the most interesting of that group, but I don't think that the Hornets are necessarily interested in paying Kevin Durant all that money, although obviously they could trade a lot of salary away to get him, and I have no indication that Kevin Durant would have any interest in playing for the Charlotte Hornets, and they just are never the type of team that makes moves like that. Aside from him, Zach LaVine, he's now on this other extension, so he doesn't even really count here. He couldn't be traded until the winter. Domantas Sabonis is not good enough to make the headliner of this package. Jared Allen, look, it's the Nets, so they would probably not do that for optics reasons. And also Jared Allen, as great of a story as he is and as awesome as he fits with that group, is not going to be the centerpiece of a Kevin Durant trade either, in my opinion. Now, I know I'm going to say that and then talk about DeAndre Ayton, and maybe you see them as similar players. Jarrett Allen certainly on a better contract, far from a max, so maybe I'm discounting Jarrett Allen, but I also just don't think Kevin Durant's going to the Cleveland Cavaliers. They are also a team that does not really make trades like that outside of the times when LeBron James has played for them. So, if you go through that list and you understand all of that, Ayton is pretty darn close to being that young all-star, and frankly, so is Mikal Bridges. I mean, I would say DeAndre Ayton and Mikal Bridges are both better than Domantas Sabonis. I would say that they're both at least equal to Jarrett Allen. So, look, the fact that they have not technically been named to an all-star team, you can quibble with. But if the Nets had a taker on that demand, the deal would have already happened. And the fact that not a lot of other teams seem like they're in line to do something like that, I guess you would throw Jaylen Brown on that list too. He is a young player who has made all-star teams, who is not on that type of max extension. I don't think the Celtics are doing this trade, and we have not heard the Celtics. So once again, the Suns remain the only team that seems to have a package that could get the job done, that also would satisfy those demands, that also would want Kevin Durant, and that he would want to play for. The other part of this from a timing standpoint that Shams' report brings up, another reason I don't fully buy that it will take that long, is that the whole rest of free agency needs to play out. Like, yes, you can point to Rudy Gobert and say, oh, well, if you realize that the Wolves were actually thinking about Gobert all the way back to the trade deadline or last season, and then you say, oh, well, it took months and months. Sort of, but the bottom line is it happened right at the beginning of free agency, basically. So that doesn't really seem the same to me. In-season stuff like Harden both times, Simmons, etc., those aren't the same. When it's in the offseason, it tends to happen quickly. You go back to Anthony Davis, that was the case. You go back to Chris Paul to the Suns, that was the case. These things move quickly because the rest of free agency needs to play out, right? These things move fast because players are held up. Other deals are held up. Dennis Schroeder, Thomas Bryant, guys who are probably good enough to get that taxpayer mid-level of $6.5 million or so, they seem to clearly be waiting for the dust to clear. Now, does one of them go to Phoenix and the other one goes somewhere else, maybe to Brooklyn, who still haven't used their taxpayer mid-level? Maybe. Does one of them go to like the Lakers on a minimum once Kyrie gets there? I'm not sure, but these options are, I don't think that these players and their agents are just going to want to wait until August, September for this deal to get done and then just have no clarity on their situation. That doesn't seem tenable. The Lakers will want a resolution on Kyrie and Russ, and if that trade is possible, because there's going to be subsequent moves there could be buyout implications if the Nets were to take Russ back and they would buy him out. If there's another few trades that happen, whether that's Jay Crowder or Landry Shamet or a bunch of players on the Nets side that might not be necessary anymore. I think Utah has some things that they might want to do. Miami hasn't really made any moves. We know John Collins and his deal seem to be held up right now and still have not happened. Miles Turner, you could say the same. So last but not least here, on the topic of what Shams said, I think he also mentioned something that's key to me, is meeting face-to-face in Summer League could really help. It seemed like that was a big part of what allowed the Paul George to the Clippers deal to finally happen. It obviously just makes sense that these people being able to get into a room would really be important. I just don't buy, for all the reasons I just explained, that this will last into August or September, but at the same time, something has got to give. So could that be the Indiana Pacers? We'll get into it in just a sec. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by Arcade 1-Up. The one and only NBA Jam is back, and Arcade 1-Up, the leader in at-home retro arcade games, is not only bringing the best game ever back to you, but they've made it bigger than ever with a, wait for it, Shaq Edition NBA Jam machine. I've played NBA Jam for as long as I can possibly remember. I loved hanging out at arcades, whether that was Sunsplash back at Golfland back in the day for any Arizona locals, or GameWorks at the Arizona Mills Mall. I've played NBA Jam every step of the way. I had it on my iPod Touch when I was a kid. We all love it. So you can jump clear across the court and set the ball on fire in one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, and no quarters required. Compete with friends and family through all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. You can pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade, the number one, up.com/. Sorry, get to that in a second. For an estimated early September ship date, Arcade 1UP is the place for fun. They've got even more classes like Golden Teal, Mortal Kombat, and many others, starting at just $399. But they are also giving away an NBA JAM Shaq Edition machine to one Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win that game console for your man cave, your living room, your bedroom, whatever it might be at arcade1up.com/locked-on. That's arcade, the number one, up.com/locked-on. You've got till July 8th to enter to win that NBA JAM Shaq Edition console, so don't miss out. Enter today. The Pacers cap situation is an interesting one, and I know a lot of folks have pointed to Indiana and the cap space that they have and said, hey, the Pacers can blow this entire thing up. I heard Amin Elhassan talking about it nationally today. I know that other people have wondered, why wouldn't the Pacers, even if they don't love DeAndre Ayton, they don't have a lot else to spend their money on, he's a young player, they could figure out the Miles Turner thing separately, and they have the money to do it. Why not just go blow this whole thing up? Well, one, you don't earn a lot of friends around the NBA by, if what you're doing can be described as blowing it up, blowing some other team's plans up. That's not really the best way to do business necessarily. But also, there's a few other components at play about how the Pacers have historically run. But as I said, they have about $30 million in space right now. If they were able to just flip Turner completely into no salaries back, they could get up to almost 50 million. I don't think that's really that likely. Turner makes 17. Remember too, a sign and trade straight up between DeAndre Ayton and Miles Turner for DeAndre Ayton works alone. I mean, maybe there would be a pick coming back in one side or something. I'm not saying that would be the only trade, but it could work by itself. And of course, if they're able to get that space, they could just sign Ayton to that offer sheet. He is a restricted free agent. It's solely up to him. The Suns have to hope he's okay going to Brooklyn or wherever he ends up. We'll talk about those possibilities more as the show continues here, but that is a very obvious potential here. However, as I mentioned with Indiana's history, they're notorious for a few things that have not gotten enough attention in my opinion. I think they're notorious for never giving max contracts out. Basically, Paul George was the last player to get one, and that was, almost, it might have been a decade ago at this point. And he was, an all-NBA caliber player. He had brought them to multiple conference finals appearances, gone toe-to-toe with LeBron James, been an incredibly consistent player, and came back from a really serious injury and all that. So he is probably one of the best players in franchise history, up there with Reggie Miller and the rest of them. So I don't think he's really comparable. But other than that, Victor Oladipo, Domantas Sabonis, even players who were sort of on that edge like those two have not gotten that max contract. Obviously, Miles Turner was nowhere near it. The other thing that the Pacers have a reputation for is not doing offer sheets. Nate Duncan of the Dunked On podcast pointed this out, talking about Indiana and its cap space. And I don't think that part of this is being recognized. Maybe that changes now because there's not as much else to use the cap space on. It's not as if they're tying up their ability to go sign other players necessarily, right? Like in the past, they've signed Jeremy Lamb or they signed Doug McDermott or some of these other players. Now there's nobody else to go sign. So a restricted free agent, an offer sheet like that, where your cap is quote unquote tied up for 3 days, doesn't really matter as much, because what else are you going to go sign Dennis Schroeder to a $20 million contract? Like, no, you're not. So maybe that changes, but those two things combined make me feel far less bullish on the idea that the Pacers pony up and just go, rain on everybody's parade and try to sign DeAndre Ayton. I want to give a shout out to David Nash on another point here when it comes to the Pacers and sort of their order of operations here as the offseason continues. The moratorium lifts tomorrow, so you'll see guys like Devin Booker be able to sign their supermaxes, but a date that David pointed to on Twitter is July 9th. The reason that's significant is the Malcolm Brogdon trade, which is the one that Indiana just did with Boston, can become official. The reason being, one of the players involved in that deal, his contract gets guaranteed that day, and then you can finally use his salary in the trade. Summer League will have started by that point. And again, as I've been saying for a couple days now, that the deadlines make deals quote, it's valid. And you could see it be tested again. Does getting into a room with each other at Summer League, once the Pacers thing becomes final, there's a little bit more of that scare of, hey, well, the Pacers, maybe it's not a max and the offer sheet doesn't scare them anymore. So some of those historical factors under that ownership go away and the Pacers boogeyman comes out. Does that give the momentum needed to just go ahead and get this deal done? On the Suns side, is that giving up Mikal Bridges? On the Nets side, is that maybe using Indiana as a third team somehow? Is it using Indiana as a third team in a Kyrie Irving Lakers trade? There's so much that can happen once the Pacers have opened up all that space. Everything still hinges on Ayton wanting Indiana, though. And I do think while he wants as big of a payday as possible, if the max isn't there, if it's something less than the max, I just don't see Ayton choosing to play under Rick Carlisle, who's never really used centers as the focal point of his teams. They're going to be rebuilding. Would he really prefer that over Brooklyn or Toronto if it's not going to be a max? I don't think so. Speaking of the Raptors, coming up, I'll tell you why I don't buy their interest and why Toronto might be a little bit more of a stalking horse for the Nets to use as leverage than an actual contender for Kevin Durant. First, today's show, guys, also brought to you by Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the planet, and from the people who invented the healthy and tasty good old-fashioned Built Bar comes the latest gift to your taste buds. If you've tried the coconut brownie chunk, guess what? They are back with the coconut brownie with the puffs treatment. So what that means is that perfect, delicious coconut brownie flavor that Built Bar produced last year, the year before, that's been one of their top sellers, but it's coming in a deliciously chewy marshmallow form covered in 100% chocolate, like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. Coconut brownie chunk puffs are only here for a limited time, so go to Built.com now to make sure you don't miss out. They're going fast, as they always do. They are not joking. I'm looking now, and I see raspberry lemonade, which sounds delicious, but I do still see right here coconut brownie chunk puffs, so they're not gone yet, but they will go. If you just scroll, you'll eventually see something that's sold out. Yes, raspberry churro puffs are sold out. So that is should be all the kick in the butt that you need to go get one. The best part about Built Puffs is, of course, they're amazing, but they're just as proteiny and just as low in sugar as always. Delicious coconut, rich, sweet brownie, and creamy marshmallow. So stop fantasizing and get to Built.com to order your box of coconut brownie chunk puffs right now. Built.com, promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 at Built.com. The Toronto Raptors have been the fun little, cute little dark horse that everybody wants to mention, especially Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN, and that's where I want to go next. Nobody in the national newsbreaker group is really mentioning the Raptors quite as often as Adrian Wojnarowski. All right. Brian Windhorst, from the beginning, has emphasized repeatedly that the Suns are the place that KD wants to be, even went so far as to sort of gesture at the fact that they might even be working with KD to get him to the Suns. Shams Charania, in the report where he did mention how long this could take, even he reiterated the Suns are the place that Durant wants to go. Chris Haynes mentioned the Suns. Really only, I believe, at one point, did we even hear the Miami Heat being on the list get referenced all that strongly? It does not feel like Kevin Durant wants to be anywhere but the Suns, and yet we keep hearing the Raptors come up. But only from this one person. So why? We know, we can assume at least, that Adrian Wojnarowski is pretty close with Nets general manager Sean Marks. He was even on Woj's podcast early in the Nets tenure when he was building up that D'Angelo Russell, Spencer Dinwiddie team. So if we assume all along, it's pretty clear to me that the information on Woj's side has been coming from the Nets side of things. Shams had the trade request first. Chris Haynes had the destination first. Those both seem like things that would be coming from Durant's side, whereas Woj has had the nitty-gritty kind of, oh, this team, that team stuff, which would be on the Nets' end. So to me, this could very well just be Woj doing Marks a solid, trying to drive up the price by talking up the Raptors as a trade partner. These are the types of things that happen. We know this. Anyone who's been following the NBA in this player empowerment era for long enough knows that this is how news moves. It's not always the full truth. It's not always just the truth. It is an agenda being given out, right? That brings us to Scottie Barnes, because if we are going to take the Raptors' interest seriously, which I don't think there's no interest, but Scottie Barnes is why I don't think the interest is super genuine or is going to get that far. Michael Grange of Sportsnet, he's a longtime Raptors reporter, wrote this week or this weekend that Toronto, quote, have remained fixed on keeping Rookie of the Year Scottie Barnes out of any package they are offering. Now, Scottie Barnes is one of those players where he doesn't quite fit that young all-star thing that's been floated out there by the Nets, but he most likely is going to make an all-star team. He's just only been in the NBA for one season. He just won Rookie of the Year. So he would be probably one of the best centerpieces the Raptors could get, but Grange, who seems to be pretty plugged in there, does not seem to believe that that's a real possibility. I believe him. I agree, because I think that if Scottie Barnes was on the table from the Toronto side, this deal would have happened already. Okay? I mean, why would the Nets not say yes immediately if a package of Barnes and picks had actually been offered, right? I just don't see any way that Durant would still be available if that had ever been talked about. So that leads me to believe that Grange is correct, and Barnes has just not been made available. So most likely to me, if the Raptors did offer anything to Brooklyn, it was centered on Pascal Siakam, who is a multiple-time All-Star now, just finished an All-NBA season. He's in his prime, so he's not quite as young, but very good player and makes a lot of money. So the salaries are pretty easy to do. And or OG Anunoby, who we've talked a lot about on this show as a potential trade piece back for DeAndre Ayton, but something centered on those two gives 2 starter level plus or better wings, and that's fine. But I just don't think that package is that much better than Ayton and Bridges when you factor in that Siakam and Anunoby are, I believe, both older, or at least in Anunoby's case, the same age. Siakam's case, older than Ayton and Bridges. And Siakam's more expensive than anybody else that would be in this deal. And Anunoby is basically, similar salary to Bridges. So there's not a lot of money saved here. There's not a lot of difference in the caliber of player overall and into the future especially. So what would be the difference? Why would that deal get it done? Unless Kevin Durant wanted to go there, which we've established there's no reason to believe he does, I just don't see this. Barnes doesn't seem to be on the table. There doesn't seem to be an awesome trade from the Toronto standpoint if Barnes is not on the table, and Durant is not going to be there, not going to be happy about being there. So this all actually, maybe I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid, maybe it's rose-colored glasses, all that good stuff, but this makes me actually feel even better about the Suns' chances. There's still nothing firm from any other team that's interested, including the Raptors. The Suns still have a great offer. And I know it's stressing everybody out that things are so quiet right now, but we know the Suns are pretty darn quiet. So for things to be as quiet as they are, to me shows the Suns might still be leading the pack, truly. If the Raptors had momentum, things seem to get out a little bit more easily there. We probably would know about it. If Boston was making Jaylen Brown available, if this other team was suddenly making a charge, I think we would know about it. Things being so quiet when we know the Suns work in silence seems to me to be a pretty good indication that the Suns are still in the driver's seat and still have a very good chance of landing Kevin Durant. I don't think this will last 2 to 3 months. I don't think that the Pacers are going to come steal DeAndre Ayton. All of this to me is collision course ahead, just as it was when Kevin Durant demanded a trade. They might have to give up a massive amount. We know that. Things are going to continue to leak. Things are going to continue to come out. But if you read those tea leaves, it just doesn't seem truly like that much has changed. I'll be back tomorrow breaking down the latest. Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report already tweeted out that he has more coming. And I just just give it all to you as it comes. That's all I can do. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen today and every day now. Go make Locked On NBA your second listen to catch up on all things NBA.